All right. Welcome to Holy Apostles Spotlight video. I am Todd Schmidtetter. I'm the rector at Holy Apostles in Satellite Beach, Florida. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about something maybe that we don't talk about a whole lot. At least I don't talk about it a whole lot, but we're going to be talking about All Saints Day. If you're not familiar, yesterday was All Saints Day. And typically, the Sunday after All Saints Day, you can celebrate All Saints Day. And that can be All Saints Sunday. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, the question of should we observe All Saints Day or should we not? And, maybe it sounds like a silly question. I think it's a fairly important question, something that we should figure out. Where do we stand on All Saints Day? And so I thought we'd have some fun. But before we get into that, if you would do me a favor, I would very much appreciate if you would hit that thumbs up like button. It helps us out tremendously. It doesn't cost you a thing. And then if you like what we're doing, if you like the content that we're putting out, consider subscribing to the channel. We would love to have you as a subscriber. With that out of the way, we can jump right into it. As I said, yesterday was All Saints Day. We didn't do anything at Holy Apostles on All Saints Day. But are we going to do something on Sunday, which would be All Saints Sunday? And the answer to that question is yes. We're gonna observe All Saints Sunday, which got me to kind of ask the question of, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of observing All Saints Sunday? And why do some churches not do it? So we're going to look at that a little bit because, again, I do think that, figuring out where you stand on this day, although it's not Easter, it's not Christmas, but it is a fairly important day in the life of the church, and so I want to look at that a little bit. I think generally when you're talking about All Saints Day, I think that there are really three camps that people generally fall into. Obviously, if you are of the Roman Catholic tradition or you are an Anglo-Catholic Episcopal, chances are All Saints Day is pretty big to you. This is a day that you regard highly. And you may even be offended at somebody asking, why would we celebrate this day? You might think, of course we're going to celebrate this day. So I think that there's a camp that is just firmly entrenched in this is an important day in the life of the church, and it needs to be observed. I think there's another camp of people that if you are, mainline Protestant denomination, or if you are in the non-denominational camp, you probably don't put a whole lot of stock in All Saints Day. So if you're Presbyterian, if you're Lutheran, if you're maybe Methodist, if you're low church Anglican, probably All Saints Day is something that you generally try to avoid. And then I think that there's probably, a third group of people who are relatively indifferent to the day. They don't care. If the church celebrates it, they'll go along with it. If the church doesn't celebrate it, they'll go along with that too. It just is a day that doesn't really register or matter a whole lot to them. I think probably by and large the vast majority of Christians fall into that category of I don't really care one way or the other. So for me, I'm a little bit of what I want to do today is kind of show you why I think that it matters. Show you why I think the day, should be observed. But there are also dangers that you need to be aware of. There are ways to observe All Saints Day, and there are ways that we wouldn't want to engage in, particularly as Protestants. So, for example, in the Protestant church, we do not pray to the saints. Now, I know a lot of people do. You're going to pray to Saint Christopher to find your things for you, and uh, Francis to take care of your pets, and all of those things. But properly speaking, Protestants do not believe in praying to the saints. And, by and large, that's because we pray to Jesus. And we just have, you can pray directly to Jesus for whatever your needs are. For as a Christian and as somebody who has a really high view of Jesus, I don't know why you would pray to Saint Francis as opposed to just praying to Jesus in the first place, or Saint Christopher to find something for you when you could just pray to Jesus. But people do, and regardless, um, we don't pray to the saints, and we also, we're not worshiping the saints either. I am, personally, I'm a Protestant through and through. I'm a Reformation Anglican in the Episcopal Church. I don't wear a chasuble. I don't cross myself. I don't go by Father. A million different things that separate myself from being ever confused with anybody who is Anglo-Catholic or just Catholic. But I do think that there's something to All Saints Day that needs to be re- observed, remembered, needs to be something that we take note of. So here's for me, when you scale everything away and you get down to the very basic of what is All Saints Day for me. I think that it's a tremendously important day in the fact that it reminds us that we are part of a larger tradition. It reminds us that within that larger tradition, that men and women have fought, have died, have suffered tremendously, been mocked, been beaten, have poured out sweat to make sure that you and I have the gospel of Jesus Christ, that you and I have the church that we worship in, that you and I have the faith that we have today, that none of that was free. It's free for you and I, but there's been a lot of effort that has gone forth throughout the generations to make it so that you and I have these things. And those are the saints of the church. Those are the saints of the faith. And so part of All Saints Day for me is remembering that I'm not on an island. It's remembering that that my faith, the church, the gospel of Jesus Christ is something that has been really passed down throughout the generations by the saints of Jesus Christ. And the reason that I have it is because they were faithful in what they were called to do. And so I think that it's really important to remember the disciples, to remember the work of the disciples, to remember John and Peter and Matthew and Thomas and all of these disciples that made sure that that they were faithful in following out the Great Commission that was given to them by Jesus. And as a result of that, you have what we refer to as the early church. And those men and women were also faithful in establishing the church. People like Polycarp and Ignatius. And even if you press the early church even further, you could potentially include Augustine in that early church. And that their faithfulness led to the medieval church, where you've got people like John Wycliffe and Bernard of Clairvaux and Aquinas, who are, again, being faithful in the gospel that they've been given, in the church and in the faith that they've been given, and pass that down to the reformers, to people like Martin Luther and John Calvin, and certainly Thomas Cranmer, our own reformer. And as a result of their work, you have what we regard as the modern day church, with great scholars like Karl Barth and T.F. Torrance and Dorothy Sayers, men and women that are really putting forward the gospel for future generations, that are really holding that faith and keeping the church alive and running. And you follow that trajectory from the disciples all the way down till you get, in our own context here at Holy Apostles, till you get to the saints at Holy Apostles. And it's not just the saints that, you and I, it's the saints of Holy Apostles. It's men and women like Jim Simmons and Dutch Spanigle and Bobby Grine, Doris Jenkins. These are the saints of Holy Apostles that we remember on All Saints Day. And it just is a wonderful day to gather and to remember that the faith that you have, the gospel that you have, the church being the body of Christ, that goes all the way back from us, all the way back to the disciples. And this is one way that you can honor and remember them. But I think that it is tremendously helpful and of great value for us in the 21st century to remember that we're not an island, that we didn't just produce the gospel, but that gospel has come down throughout the generations. This is apostolic succession happening right before us, that the gospel coming down throughout the generations till you get it here. This is a day worthy of remembering. This is a day worthy of honoring, because you're not worshiping them, you're not praying to them, but you're remembering that God has faithfully worked through them, just as he will faithfully work through you and I to pass the gospel, the faith, the church down. And it's also, a sobering reminder that we should not be very quick to try to change or alter the gospel, to try to change or alter the faith, because this is a historic thing that goes all the way back to Jesus. So this is a really, it's a good day in the life of the church. We're going to observe All Saints Sunday, this Sunday coming up, and I'm excited to do that, because again, it's a reminder of the great tradition that you and I stand in. So take that for what it is. I don't think that you have to go so far as worshiping the saints or praying to them. I also don't think you have to go so far as to just throwing away the day. I think that there's a good middle ground that we can sit in and enjoy the history, and experience the history, in having the gospel and the faith alive today. So that's today. That's the spotlight for today. I hope I hope what I shared was helpful, and I'd love to see you on Sunday. I'm gonna end this right now. Here we go.